Hi, today we'll be talking about lists and list manipulation. So there are many types of lists, including string lists, number lists, and Boolean lists, and even a combination of all of them. So first, I'll show you how to define each type of list, and with a basic example. So as you notice immediately, when we define a list, we first have to set it to a variable. So this is important because if we store the list in a variable, later when we want to talk about the list, when we want to do programming that affects the list, we can just use the variable instead of typing out the entire list again. That's the purpose of variables. So in a string list, we tell the program that we're making a list by using these hard brackets around the list. So that's a standard notation and how the program interprets lists. And then within a list, each item in a list is separated by comma to tell it that it's a separate item. And then in string lists, of course, every item is a string. So number lists are defined the same way, except there's numbers instead of strings, and Boolean lists exactly the same. Okay. Just need Booleans in there. And then you could have a list that mixes all of these up. So you could have a string and then a number and then a Boolean. These are all valid lists. For the sake of today, I'm just going to be focusing on string lists since list manipulation applies to all these lists. So anything I can do to a string list, it's pretty much the same for all of the other lists, the basic things at least. So I'm just going to redefine the list, a string list here, right? So the first thing we have to learn about lists is something called index. So an index determines the position of the item in the list. So and indexes increase numerically in numerical order. So starting from 0. So what that means is the banana has an index of 0, apple has an index of 1, and cookie has an index of 2. So the first item in a list has an index of 0, second item has an index of 1, and etc. It goes on numerically in numerical order. So an index is useful because it can tell us the position of a word of an item in the list and this is useful when a list is very long and you don't know the position of every single item, or you can do the opposite and you can find the word at a certain index, right? So how we access the index, right, is simply via this. So this notation is how we access the indexes of a list. So we first have to tell it what we're applying the index to, like what we're finding the index, like what list we're actually using the finding the index of, and then the hard brackets denote that we're looking for an index when used in this context, and the number inside the hard brackets actually tell us which index which index of the list we are looking for. So the first index refers to the second item in the list, so this should return apple. The other thing we can do is the opposite. So if we want to look for a specific item in the list and we know what the item is, then we can look for the index of the item. So that would just simply be a dot index command. And then in the parentheses, so here we first have to, again, write out the variable that represents the list, because this tells us what we're actually applying the function to. And then dot index is the function that we're applying onto the list. And then inside the parentheses, we're telling it what we actually want to find. So what we want, what index of what word that we want to find the index of. So if we want to find the index of apple, we expect it to return 1. So it does return 1. The next thing you can do is actually expand the list, right? Sometimes we might start with an empty list and then add stuff in that we think that we want to add, right, as we go. So let's say you loop through an entire database and you only want to add certain types of data. Then you can start with an empty list and slowly add data in as you find things that you want to add. So how you could do this is, let's say you start with the same list, right? And then the command to add to a list is called append. And what append does is it adds an item to the end of the list. So I'll just show you how it works. Again, we use the dot append function, and then we have to write list here again to tell the function what we're actually applying the function to. And then dot append is the specific function for adding an item to the end of a list. And then inside the parentheses, we have to tell it what we want to add. So let's say we want to add pizza. So now if we print the list, right, we should have the same list as before, except pizza is added to the end. That's what we're expecting. Right, that's what we got. The next thing we can actually do is add entire lists. So sometimes adding items one by one isn't very efficient because maybe we want to add like a ton of items that's already in another list. Then we can just simply add the two lists together, and this is very, very simple. Here, I'll just show you how it's done. So first of all, for this to work, we need two lists, right? Let's say our first list is hi and hello, and then our second list is bye and goodbye. And let's say we want to add these lists. So the order in which you add the lists actually matter because it will determine the order of the elements in the new list. So let's say list 3. So let's define a new list that is the combination of both of these lists. And to add the items in the list, you simply use that addition. So it's very, very straightforward. And then this will add the list 1 items first and then the list 2 items second. So when we combine them, it should say hi, hello, bye, goodbye. So when we actually print list 3, that's what it should output. And there are that's what it did. Finally, let's talk about a few more useful functions that can be applied to lists that are built in on Python. The first one is reverse, which reverses lists. And then the second one is sort, which sorts a list in alphabetical order. So for the first one, I'll just demonstrate how it's done. So let's say you have banana, apple, and cookie, right? And if you use list.reverse, what this does is it reverses the list. And you can see here that the first thing that you have to write is the actual variable for the list because it tells us what we're applying the reverse on, and then dot reverse is the function name. And then the parentheses here are actually empty because you're not reversing like a specific item inside the list, you're reversing the entire list. So you don't have a specific argument that you need to input here. Now if you print the list, it should output the reverse of the list. So yeah, I did. Finally, there's list.sort. So what that does is it sorts the list in alphabetical order, and it's in the same format as list.reverse. So I'm not going to explain it again, but essentially, it should just sort it in alphabetical order. So apple, banana, cookie. That's alphabetical order. Yeah. Thanks.